Clarify, Robert, I have to interrupt. I am not against the concept that we may well have sealed our fate, personally.
You know, I've been researching and writing about this for a number of years. And the thing that strikes me is that I keep running into year over year over year, unprecedented this, unprecedented that. 10 times more, than the paleoclimate record, or 3 times more. But it's every year a new unprecedented. It's becoming an annual thing. It's building up to some kind of a crescendo. And I think we're starting to see that crescendo right now. And it lends itself to a real sense of urgency. And maybe the doomsday thing is more on deck than you realize.
Thwaites Glacier is one of the largest in Antarctica, and it is melting at an alarming rate. The world took notice earlier this month when temperatures there hit nearly 70 degrees.
I've got an article coming out tomorrow. The title of it is "The World on Fire." The world on fire. It's literally on fire. A couple things I just want to bore you with, maybe, and hopefully I don't bore you, but according to the Copernicus Atmosphere Monitoring Service, in June and July of this year, the Arctic fires have released 204 megatons of CO2. Now, in all of last year, the fires released 140 megatons.
Around the
What
world,
I'm saying,
or in the Arctic?
no, just the fires. In the Arctic fires last year, they had the fires last year also, same as this year. But the difference is, last year the total was 140 megatons for the fire season in the Siberian Arctic. This year, in June and July alone, 2 months only, 204 megatons. This thing is a monster. It's biblical. So there's an additional problem in the Arctic that comes from this Copernicus Atmosphere Monitoring Service. And this part of it comes from a gentleman named Thomas Smith at the London School of Economics. They did some measurements of what's happening in the Siberian Arctic. And half of these fires now are burning peat soil. And what's kind of strange about this is ordinarily peat is way too wet, it's way too cold to burn. But the high temperatures are so powerful, they're literally baking the Arctic. And peat soils, once they start to burn, they burn forever, and they emit both CO2 and also methane. This is an enormous biblical problem. In addition to that, the Amazon rainforest, in July alone, they identified 6,803 fires in only July because of what was happening in the Amazon rainforest. Now we're 30% worse, and the fire season, and here's what's really got a lot of people on the green train really upset. The fire season hasn't even really started yet. Superimposed on top of that, look at what happened to Australia last year. Entire landscapes were decimated last year in Australia. And this is all because our goddamn planet is heating up way too much in too many fringe areas where people don't live, and the planet can't handle it. And so I think maybe it's almost a mistake to cancel the doomsday. I think John Doyle ends up becoming a prophet based upon his speech. That's what I think.
Let me clarify, Robert, I have to interrupt. I am not against the concept that we may well have sealed our fate, personally. However, we are subject to extreme ostracism, criticism, ridicule.
I know.
By saying there's no hope, by saying there's no chance of averting. The other thing is that you're looking at the anthropocentric view. yes, humans may be out of here, but my mission is to look at the bigger view of life on Earth. And so it's our mandate, our responsibility to end the madness in any way we can as soon as possible to preserve the possibility of life on Earth.
But it's all really come into place since the start of the new century, since 2000. And this is when the rapid acceleration takes place, and you see it in the numbers. Let me just throw a couple things by you here, because this is telling us that we've got a much bigger problem than anybody. You know, Michael Mann, I noticed, put out a video not too long ago, Mr. Hockey Stick, downplaying this whole doomsday thing also, and downplaying the whole thing about the East Siberian Arctic Sea methane eruption, the potential, you know, big eruption out of there, and downplaying that and saying that's just not going to happen. And I'm not a climate scientist, but I think he's wrong. Well, you know, here's what I'd like to tell Michael Mann. You know, if you look at the ice mass loss in Greenland and Antarctica combined in the 1990s, those two are the biggest ice, those are 95% of the ice on the planet. Those two sources lost 89 billion tons per year of ice on average during the 1990s. In the 2010s, it's 523 billion tons per year versus 89 billion tons. Is that acceleration? You're damn right that's acceleration. Not only that, the Great Barrier Reef has had 3 devastating bleaching events in only 5 years. In March of this year, they looked at 1,036 reefs that were totally bleached out. In every segment, there are 3 regions of the Great Barrier Reef. There's the north, there's the middle, there's the south. This is the first time, here we go, unprecedented again, first time ever, all 3 regions are bleached. We're losing the Great Barrier Reef, Mr. Mann. Not only that, is the droughts are coming so rapidly on the heels of one another that it doesn't have the chance to regrow the way it used to. Because if you leave it alone, it'll regrow really fast. But it can't, because the droughts are coming too fast. Now on top of that, you've got humanity chopping down the trees just as fast as they can. You've got some 300-year-old, 500-year-old, 1,000-year-old trees, and they love cutting them down. So these, to me, it's almost insane for a climate scientist to come out and say some of the things some of these people are saying, and I'll leave it at that. The Barents Sea. Now, the Barents Sea, you know, Dar Jamal's book, The End of Ice, he that's a brilliant book. If you haven't read it, you need to. But what Dar Jamal did is he actually boots on the ground journalism. He goes to the sites and he sees them and he talks to the people there. And there's a scientist, climate scientist named Ira.
I've seen him.
Leifer, yes. And he does
George has
work.
interviewed him as well. Yeah, that's terrible.
He does work for NASA, and he did this work in the Barents Sea, and he found you're probably your mouth's gonna drop open, but 60 million plumes of methane. I think the problems are huge, and I think we do have a doomsday situation. And I think that as far as Roger's concerned with Extinction Rebellion, you know, I can't congratulate you enough for the kind of work you're doing, because it's thankless, almost thankless, and I'm sure you create an enormous number of enemies, but someone has to do that. Someone's got to get out there and kick butt. Good trip. Let's do a little travel. Let's travel around the world and see what's going on.
Yes.
Let's really find out what peer-reviewed science is telling us today. What's happening today? What you're going to find out is we're going to look at 6 major ecosystems, starting with Antarctica. And we're going to find out what the science is telling us today. And what you're going to find out is all of these major ecosystems are starting to collapse. They're various stages of collapse.
Yes.
Clearly happening. But what's interesting about it, Michael, is that nobody lives there. They don't see it unless you're a scientist.
Yes.
Who lives in Antarctica? Who lives in the Arctic? Who lives in Greenland? I mean, around the edges, a few people, right? How about the Amazon rainforest? Yeah, there's some indigenous people, but you know, for the average person in the world, their lives are sterile, they're artificial. What is your life? Think about it for a minute. In my life here in Los Angeles, it's concrete, it's copper, it's steel, it's glass, it's wood, and a lot of chemicals.
Yes.
That's what our lives are.
Yes.
So in Los Angeles, it's nice every day when I go out. And it's kind of hard to imagine that there's something going on beyond that.
For anybody watching or listening to this, we are recording this in mid-October of 2020, just so you have a sense of time frame here.
Yeah, okay, so what I'd like to do as kind of a preamble to going to these 6 different ecosystems and discussing what the science is telling us, is what I'd like to do is first to formally invite you to the 6th mass extinction event. You're a participant, I'm a participant, everybody's a participant. And we know there have been 5 before this because the scientists have studied them and told us all about those. And we also know that the worst of those prior 5 extinctions was the Permian Triassic event in 252 million years ago. And what happened then? Well, you had the biggest, most severe annihilation that the planet's ever experienced. 94% of all marine life was annihilated. 75 to 80% of terrestrial life. And this, and by the way, the extinction event back then took 60,000 years to complete. But there was a big hump kind of at one point where the majority of it, the great bulk of it happened over a couple hundred years. But from A to Z, start to finish, 60,000 years, think about that. That's the only extinction event in the history of the planet that wiped out the insects and also the trees in the forest. And by the way, we're starting to do a pretty good job on those ourselves right now, on the insects and the trees in the forest. Exactly. But that's the only one that also wiped out the insects. So recently, the World Wildlife Foundation and the Zoological Society of London came out with a landmark study. It's a 46-year analysis of wild vertebrate life on the planet. And what's wild vertebrate life? It's mammals excluding humans, by the way. We're not wild yet. Birds, maybe we are. Amphibians, reptiles, and fish, right? Yes. 68% plunge or deaths in wild vertebrate life in only 46 years. Yeah. In only 46 years. I mean, this is mind-blowing. It really, really is if you stop and really think about it. So let's just do a little something here, a little exercise, just to see what would happen if we could superimpose that rapid rate of descent that we've had the last 46 years. If we could superimpose that, going back 252 million years to the Permian Triassic event. The 60,000 years, I think you'd have to lop off 3 zeros if you take our rate of descent. Yes. So if you really let that sink in and think about it, we're moving fast. Exactly. Really too fast. And I'd like to talk about, again, before we get into the various ecosystems, our brush with near total annihilation for all of humanity. It was with the ozone hole. A lot of people forget about this, but it happened back in 70s and 80s. Mm-hmm. And it might be worthwhile just to walk through that for a minute, because there's a lesson to be learned there. The ozone molecule is maybe one of the most important molecules in the biosphere, because it's really the planet's copper tone or sunscreen. It prevents the harmful UV rays, the ultraviolet radiation from the sun, from excessively burning off Earth. Well, what happened is that DuPont in the 1930s started manufacturing CFCs, or chlorofluorocarbons. And they used it in refrigeration purposes. It was used in air conditioning, eventually hairsprays and underarm sprays, all kinds of things. So they started in the 30s, and by the 1970s, there were some scientists who said, hey, wait a minute. We think these CFCs are shooting right up into the upper atmosphere where the ozone molecules are, and they're located in the stratosphere at 10 to 20,000 feet. And they're widely dispersed. If there's an ozone molecule right here, there's not going to be one here, or way over here. It'll be widely dispersed. But they're our best friends on the planet. We got to have them. Well, in the 70s, so scientists started questioning, could something be going wrong here with our ozone molecules? Are these CFCs gobbling them up? Well, DuPont did the same thing with this that the fossil fuel industry did with CO2. Denial, and we're not sure. We're really not sure. In fact, in 1979, they made the following statement. They said, no ozone depletion has ever been detected. Now that's 1979.
IPCC report is code red for humanity. That's fairly clear. The subhead, human activity is changing the climate in unprecedented and sometimes irreversible ways, a major UN report has said. Sometimes irreversible ways. Now, climate change is either irreversible or it's not. It's either reversible or it's not. So, interestingly, the IPCC itself admitted in their September 2019 special report on the ocean's cryosphere that due to the overheating of the ocean, climate change is irreversible. We'll continue to see right up until the bitter end corporate media outlets saying things like, sometimes irreversible ways, when in fact it's irreversible at this point. Climate change is absolutely irreversible. It has been for years. Indeed, I noted some 65 self-reinforcing feedback loops, any one of which indicates that climate change is irreversible. Those are all rooted in the peer-reviewed literature or major government assessments, and they're posted at GuyMcPherson.com. Now, skip down to the second line in this paper in BBC. The report is a code red for humanity, says the UN chief. The UN chief is Antonio Guterres, and need I point out that he said in September of 2018, we had until 2020 to fix this mess. So at that point we had 15 months, and now apparently we have a little more time, always a little more time. Despite warnings that go back more than a century, we always have a little more time to fix the unfixable. Scientists say a catastrophe can be avoided if the world acts. Really? Scientists have been sounding warnings for more than a century, and the relevant actions have not been taken. So I really don't think this is going to do the trick. Even if it says code red in the headlines, I still don't think we can overcome aerosol masking effect, at least 65 self-reinforcing feedback loops, and most notably an overheated ocean. I don't think we're going to overcome that. All the way down to paragraph 4 now, there is hope that deep cuts in emissions of greenhouse gases could stabilize rising temperatures. The more likely outcome? Deep cuts in emissions of greenhouse gases would be associated with reductions in industrial activity, thereby causing loss of aerosol masking and leading to a stunningly rapid rate of increase in the global average temperature. If you want all life to go extinct as quickly as possible, start reducing industrial activity. Instead, this report, and I'm sure at least 99% of the others from the corporate media, indicate that you and I need to be reducing our emissions, and that will somehow save the day. I don't think so. UN Secretary General, again, Antonio Guterres, said, quote, if we combine forces now, we can avert climate catastrophe. But as today's report makes clear, there is no time for delay and no room for excuses. I count on government leaders and all stakeholders to ensure COP26 is a success. As a side note, I'm sure it will be a public relations success, so it's going to have that going for it. Otherwise, it's going to be an unmitigated disaster, just like every one of the 25 COPs before it. Just like every scientist who has sounded an alarm for literally generations. It's going to be an unmitigated disaster. This is the human condition, folks. I'm not happy to tell you, but surely you've noticed at this point, if you're older than the age of 9.
Brutal on my generation of baby boomers, or those of us that have been alive in the last 100 to 150 years. I tend to agree with William Catton in his masterful book Overshoot, that we're probably doing what any tool-using symbolic speech facilitating animal would do. And yet that doesn't absolve us from the responsibility, as you say, as you just said, to tell the truth, to be there in an in a way that stands with young people, and not just stands with them as if giving them the impression that we can avoid the shit that's coming, but that we recognize that we have not done all that we could. And they're now going to inherit a profoundly degraded world, if our species even survives at all, which is, there's a very, very good chance that we don't survive more than another decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, 4 decades, 5 decades. I often say that whether we go extinct in 5 years or 5 million years, that's pretty short. Even if we lasted, even if there are, say, 50 pockets of humans that exist on this planet, say 20, 30, 40 years from now, once the feedback loops have sort of done what they've done to destroy 98 to 99% of human population, even if that's the case, even if there are little pockets that survive, they will mythologize the crash of this civilization to such a degree that, kind of like that scene in Avatar, this is the crater in our racial memory that we will never forget. But even if that's the case, we're still going to go extinct in, the not too distant future from the universe's time standpoint. So
there was a famous quote from Carl Sagan that said that extinction is the rule, survival is the exception.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I just yesterday had an email communication with DJ White, who has done more to facilitate the ongoing survival of cetaceans, dolphins, whales, and that sort of thing. And the true tragedy from his vantage point, and I agree, is not just human extinction, but the extinction of these other intelligent, social, amazing creatures that it will be a long time before Earth recovers that. So it's, Connie, my wife, is all about assisting trees in migrating, whether humans survive or not. We can still do things that increase the likelihood of other species, plant and animal, making it through this bottleneck.
Oh, absolutely. It's our moral obligation to do whatever we can.
Yes.
I volunteer at a not-for-profit nursery on the island where we propagate native trees. I believe that all the forests on this planet are going to immolate in the not too distant future as things run away, because I believe we're in runaway, early stage runaway.
Yeah.
But someone has to be the last person to plant a tree. Why wouldn't you do it? It's my final act of rebellion.
Yeah. Well, it's also, you say that, and I agree, and I'm sure that's true for you, but it's also a final act of love. You wouldn't be doing it if there weren't a sense of caring for that which is beyond you, or defining your sense of self as more than you, and being in service on that behalf.
Oh, there's no question. Planting a tree and watching it grow is an extraordinary, rewarding experience. And what we're noticing on the island is we are probably one of the only places in the world where the bird song is going up every month.